One thing that makes me really like about Panasonic Lumix camera is that Panasonic really like to do things in their own way instead of just copying what everyone else does. They do things just differently. There are some design that I really like, but also some I'm a little bit confused even after so many years. So in this video, I'm going to share with you 10 most important things that you should know before you pick up your first Panasonic Lumix camera. Some are more important for photographers, some for videographers. But no matter you are primarily a photographer or videographer, there should be something that would benefit you. And I also have one little extra bonus tip that I'm going to share with you at the end of the video, which I think is one of the coolest design of the Panasonic Lumix camera. There are two series of Panasonic Lumix mirrorless cameras, G series and S series. G series cameras are the micro four thirds cameras and the S series are the full frame L-mount cameras. Most camera mounts in the market is usually associated with just one camera brand, so even though there may be third-party lenses available for pretty much every single mount in the market, but you would usually only find camera from one particular brand for a particular lens mount. For example, Sony E-mount cameras are only from Sony, Nikon Z-mount camera are from Nikon. However, both the Micro Four Thirds and the L-mount that Panasonic use are supported by multiple camera manufacturers. There are Micro Four Thirds cameras from Panasonic, Olympus, which is now called OM System, Blackmagic, Yongnuo, and more. For the L-mount, Leica, Sigma, and Panasonic create cameras and lenses for this mount as they are all the founding members of the L-mount Alliance, and recently Liz and DJI both joined the L-mount Alliance as well. So if you choose either of these mounts, you are not locked into one particular camera brand, which is great for customers like us. However, you need to be aware of one very important thing. Micro Four Thirds and L-mount are two completely different systems. Not only the sensor size is different, the mount design is different. You cannot use Micro Four Thirds lenses on a L-mount camera or vice versa. And because the flange distance of these two mounts are very similar, so there is also no adapter available to adapt lens from one of these mounts to the other. For myself, I use both Micro Four Thirds and L-mount cameras, but since most people would probably only choose one system and stick with it, there are pros and cons for each of these systems, so pick the system that is the best for you. Before we move on to the next point, I would like to say a big thank you to my friends at lmountforum.com who gave me a lot of suggestions about what I should cover in this video. This video is not sponsored by them, but I do use that forum quite a bit since DP Review shut down their website. So if you are a L-mount user, go check out their forum and you will see me there as well. Most cameras in the market have a switch or dial on the camera for you to switch between photo and video mode. Usually you have to be in video mode to shoot video and photo mode to take photo, but this is not the case for the Panasonic Lumix cameras. With most of the Panasonic Lumix cameras, there is a dedicated video record button which allows you to shoot video even when you are in photo mode. However, you may notice your camera is not using your camera's photo mode exposure settings when you trigger the video recording by pressing the red record button. It's because with the Panasonic Lumix camera, you will need to first turn the mode dial into creative video mode. Then you can choose the exposure mode you want and you can have full control of the exposure. You can also choose whether the creative video mode share the settings with the photo mode. And it is not just a single setting for you to choose whether you want to share all the photo mode camera settings with the video mode or not, you can customize exactly what you want to share between the photo mode and the video mode, which I found is really useful because I think a lot of users have their own special preference on what they want to carry over when they switch between the photo and video mode. This is a really nice design that makes the Panasonic camera great for hybrid shooters. At the back of the Panasonic Lumix camera, you can find a Q button which would bring up the Q menu. You have all the Q menu settings listed on the side of the screen. You can select any of them using either the touch screen or the dial on the camera, and then you can see what settings you can change at the bottom of the screen. But you will still have the camera preview on the top left of the screen. Now, most of the cameras in the market will have a similar feature, but there is actually two things that I only found out very recently. One is that there are two different Q menu modes available. The default one, mode 1, is what I have just shown you. Then there is a mode 2 that uses the full screen to show you the Q menu settings. For some of the settings, it's just a little bit easier to see because now you're using a bigger screen to display the settings. But for some settings, there has a lot of options that you can choose, like the white balance setting or the photo style. Then the mode 2 is definitely much better because you can see a lot of options on the screen at the same time. But the downside is that you lost the preview when the Q menu is showing on the screen. The other thing that I've only just found out recently is that you can customize what is displayed on the Q menu. For a very long time, I was thinking why the photo file format output is not in the Q menu, because that's one thing that I change quite regularly. And another thing that I also really want to do is to change the shutter type from the Q menu very quickly. Turns out I can actually customize the Q menu to do both of these very easily. And not just that, I can customize the Q menu for the photo and video mode separately, which again makes it great for hybrid shooters. With the Lumix S5II, Panasonic has finally introduced PDAF face detection to their cameras, and I was really impressed by the performance of this new hybrid autofocus system. It's not perfect, but its overall performance is really close to the best autofocus cameras in the market, which is something I can't really say when Panasonic was only using DFD autofocus technology. There are lots of different settings and mode for the Panasonic autofocus system. I'm definitely not going to go through everything in this video, but one thing I want to talk about is the most important setting that you should use if you want the camera to detect and track the human that is in front of the camera. So there are two different modes that you can use: face and eye detection and human detection. I didn't really understand what the difference is at the beginning, and I thought I should just use face and eye detection by default. But turns out human detection is what Panasonic recommend us to use in general. The reason is, when you use face and eye detection, the camera would only try to detect the face or eyes inside the AF area that you have selected. So if your subject is not really facing the camera, or they are quite far away from the camera so the camera cannot detect the eyes or face, then the camera would just focus on the closest object in front of the camera. Now if you select human detection, the camera would still try to detect the eyes and face first, but if the camera cannot detect the eyes or face, then it would fall back and try to detect any head or body in front of the camera instead and use that as the tracking point. So if your subject walk away from the camera will still be able to detect and follow your subject even when your subject is far away from the camera. So this is the more reliable setting if you want the camera to just focus on the human in front of the camera. Very often when people talk about Panasonic Lumix cameras, we would think Lumix cameras are most suitable for videography. It is easy to see why, because Lumix cameras usually are jam-packed with many video features, and the quality of the video captured by Lumix camera is very often the best for its price. But just because Lumix cameras are very good video cameras doesn't mean it's a bad photo camera. In fact, there are many photo features that Panasonic Lumix cameras can do that other brands can't. Almost all the S series camera has a multi-shot high-resolution mode that can generate high-resolution photos by taking multiple exposures and stitching all the photos together. Some of the G series cameras can also do that too, and the GH6 even allow you to do the multi-shot high-resolution mode without using a tripod, so you can just do it by hand holding the camera. Now, there are cameras from other brands that would also allow you to do that, but one thing that Panasonic does that no other brands can do, at least for the full frame cameras when I'm recording this video, is the high resolution shot is created in camera. So the Panasonic camera would create the high resolution photo in RAW or JPEG format automatically for you after you took the photo, and it only takes a few seconds. The in-camera processing is a big advantage compared to other brands that would require you to do it using a special software on the computer afterwards, as not only the in-camera processing is a much faster workflow, you can also examine if the high resolution photo looks good or not, or if there is any issues pretty much immediately after you took the photo. Speaking of in-camera processing, Panasonic Lumix cameras also have a built-in RAW editor. Now, while the in-camera RAW editor is definitely nothing as complicated or advanced as software like Adobe Lightroom, but it does allow you to do some good basic editing and use it to generate a JPEG in camera, which can be really handy if you want to send a photo to someone without having to load the RAW file to a computer or a tablet first. With the real-time LUT feature that is introduced with the Panasonic Lumix S5II, you can also apply your own LUT to do a bit of color grading, either when you are capturing the photo or after you capture the photo, as long as you shot it in the RAW format. There is also the live view composite mode. That is a very nice feature that takes advantage of computational photography, and you can use it to create some nice long exposure photo that you can't do with the normal long exposure. And the output file is also created in camera as you take the photo. Most of the latest Lumix camera also has a really nice built-in time-lapse mode as well, easily the best I've seen on any camera. Anyway, if you are a photographer, you really should check out all the different things that your Lumix camera can do without a computer. Now, speaking of computer, no matter you buy a camera mainly for photo or video, since internet is just part of our life these days, so there will be occasions that you will want to do a video call with your friends or work, or even do some live streaming as well. Some Panasonic Lumix cameras have built-in live streaming support like the GH5 Mark II or the S5II, but pretty much all the latest Lumix mirrorless camera released over the last few years can be used as a webcam. What you need to do is download the free Lumix webcam driver from the Lumix website. I will put a link below. It's available for both Windows and Mac, and after you install this software, you just need to connect your camera to the computer using a USB cable. Remember, it is the USB cable, not HDMI cable. Then you should be able to use your Lumix camera as a really high quality webcam. If you want to learn more about it, I have created a separate video that talks about this webcam software, which includes a step-by-step step-by-step setup instruction. I will put the link to this video in the video description below. Panasonic Lumix cameras usually has a focus mode switch at the back of the camera, which provides you a very easy way for you to switch between single focus, continuous autofocus, and manual focus when you are shooting photos. But when you are shooting video, you may notice this focus switch doesn't really do what you thought it would do. Turn the switch to the MF position and your video recording will turn into manual focus, so that's good. But when you turn the switch to S position, you may notice the camera is still doing continuous autofocus when you are shooting video. Isn't S means single autofocus? So what's happening? This is one of the strange Panasonic design that I don't really understand. But anyway, when you are shooting video, instead of using that focus switch to tell the camera to do continuous or single autofocus, you need to go into the camera's menu system under the video tab, continuous AF setting. This is the place that you tell the camera whether you want the camera to do continuous autofocus or not when you are recording video. And the camera will apply the setting no matter the focus switch is in the S or C position. On most of the Lumix cameras that I have used, this is default to mode 1, which means video mode continuous autofocus is only enabled during recording. If you want continuous autofocus to work even when you are not recording video, change it to mode 2. And if you don't want continuous autofocus, just set it to off and you can use the shutter button to trigger a single autofocus operation. On Panasonic Lumix cameras mode dial, there are usually at least 2 custom mode available, C1 and C2. The Lumix S5II has 3 custom modes, the GH6 has 4. These custom modes allow you to save the camera setup so that you can quickly switch back to a particular setup very easily, and it can be used for photo or video mode. For example, you may have a particular setting for shooting landscape photos and another one for shooting portrait photos. Or maybe you're like me, I have a particular setting for shooting my YouTube talking head video. With the latest Lumix cameras, the last custom mode can store multiple custom mode settings. So when you switch to that last custom mode, you can choose which of the multiple custom mode you want to use. For a very long time, I thought I can only store 3 settings for that last custom mode position, but turns out that is only the default setting. You can save between 1 to 10 different custom mode settings in the last custom mode. What you need to do is just go into the camera's menu and custom mode settings, and you can choose the number of custom mode available between 1 to 10. And when you're there, you can also adjust whether you want the custom mode setting to include your exposure and white balance settings or not. One of the big advantages shooting with a mirrorless camera compared to DSLR is that the mirrorless camera's electronic viewfinder can show you what the photo will look like by letting you preview the effect of white balance and exposure, etc. You pick up your brand new Panasonic Lumix camera. If you're shooting in P, A, or S mode, you adjust the exposure compensation and you can see the screen brightness changes accordingly, which is great. However, when you switch to M, full manual mode, if you fix the ISO setting, then when you adjust the shutter speed or aperture, it should affect the exposure, but the EVF or the LCD preview doesn't get any darker or brighter. So why is that? This is because Lumix camera has a setting called constant preview, and that is usually default to off. If it is off, it means when you are in full manual mode, the preview does not show you the effect caused by the aperture or the shutter speed setting. If you set constant preview to on, then adjust the aperture or shutter speed would affect how bright the scene will look like in the preview. But not only that, You can also preview the effect of the aperture and the shutter speed as well. You can see the actual depth of field and the motion blur effect in the preview that matches your exposure settings. So it gives you a very good approximation of what your photo will look like. Now you may wonder, this sounds like a great feature, so why is it default to off, or why would anyone want to turn off the constant preview? One of the reasons is if you are shooting with strobe, quite often you adjust the exposure to get rid of or dial down the ambient lighting and rely on the strobe to light up your subject when you take the photo. So if constant preview is on, then your preview will be really dark, so it's not good because you can't even see what you are shooting. You will want to turn off constant preview, and now you can see everything clearly, even if your camera's exposure setting is really underexposing the scene. Since I don't shoot with strobe very often these days, I usually leave the constant preview on. However, if I have to set the shutter speed very slow, for example, when I'm shooting landscape photos at night and the shutter speed could be a few seconds or even longer than that, the really slow shutter speed would make it very hard to frame the photo, as any changes to the camera position or when I zoom in or zoom out the lens, it would take a few seconds for the preview to update, and also the preview may look very blurry. You have to keep the camera perfectly still for a few seconds to get a sharp preview. With the latest Lumix cameras, you can change the constant preview settings to aperture only. If you do that, the camera would ignore the shutter speed setting completely during the preview, and you would only preview the effect of the aperture setting, which means you can see the actual depth of field. However, with this setting, since the preview would ignore the shutter speed setting completely, it kind of makes the preview works like if you are shooting in aperture priority mode. So the preview exposure is no longer the actual exposure even you have the constant preview turned on. This is something that really confused me for quite a while, so I hope my explanation can make you understand what's happening. Another very nice thing that Lumix camera can offer is that there are lots of different aspect ratio for both videographers and photographers. For videographers, you have the standard 16:9 widescreen ratio. You also have the slightly wider DCI 4K. But for some of the camera, you also have the open gate mode, which means it uses the full sensor height and full sensor width when you are shooting video. With the open gate 3:2 or 4:3 output, depends on if you're shooting with a S series or G series camera. As long as you frame your video properly when you are recording, you can shoot both the widescreen video and vertical video at the same time, as you just need to crop it in post-processing to deliver it in both formats. It saves you a lot of time to reshoot the same video twice. Well, technically, you can do that even if you're shooting in the normal 16:9 format. But if you try to crop a vertical video from a 16:9 video, you will end up have to do more cropping, and your vertical video will be recorded using a smaller area of the sensor. And also because your original video and your vertical video aspect ratio is very different, so the cropping would be also more challenging as well. All the Lumix cameras that can shoot in open gate mode would also have some visual assist tools that can help you with the framing. You can overlay a frame marker of a certain aspect ratio on top of your preview. For example, you can choose the 9:16 aspect ratio frame marker, and then you can preview what the vertical video crop will look like when you're shooting in open gate mode. Now at the moment, you can only overlay one frame marker, but if you are planning to crop it to get both the 16:9 and also the 9:16 vertical video, then it doesn't really work that well. Fortunately, there is a workaround for that. If you're shooting with a S series L-mount camera in open gate mode, you can enable the 3x3 grid. The area inside the two vertical grid line is very similar to the vertical format video. If you do the math, 1/3 of the 3:2 aspect ratio output would give you 8:16 aspect ratio, so it's only slightly narrower than the 9:16 aspect ratio of the common vertical video format that we use these days. So if you enable the 3x3 grid and also the 16:9 frame marker, then you can preview both the framing of the vertical and horizontal video at the same time. Unfortunately, this trick doesn't work quite well for micro four thirds cameras because the typical micro four thirds camera sensors has the 4:3 aspect ratio rather than 3:2. If you are a photographer, there are also lots of different aspect ratio output for the photo as well. You have the normal 3:2 for L-mount or 4:3 for micro four thirds. There's 16:9, 2:1, 1:1. But my favorite is definitely 65:24, which is the really wide aspect ratio, similar to the Hasselblad X-Pan film camera. I just love that cinematic look from this aspect ratio. I have a few videos on my channel sharing the photos that I shot in this aspect ratio. I really like those photos and I highly recommend you to check out those videos after you finish watching this video. To me, there is also another reason why I would use the frame marker. When I using the S5II and shoot in the high resolution mode, the camera doesn't allow you to choose the 65:24 aspect ratio. So while I can always just crop the photo in post-processing, I would need a way for me to preview how the photo would look like if I shoot in 65:24 aspect ratio. So what I can do is enable the frame marker and choose the custom setting. So it is 55:100, and that will give me almost exactly the 65:24 aspect ratio preview so that I can make sure the photo would look nice in this aspect ratio. Okay, now here comes the bonus tip that I promised at the beginning. It is actually a very small thing, but this is one of my favorite Lumix camera feature. Lumix cameras usually has a lot of customizable buttons that you can customize in the menu system, just like most other cameras in the market. But there is a much easier and quicker way for you to customize the buttons. And that is just by press and hold the button for a few seconds. And it will bring up the customized menu and you can choose the function that you want to assign to that button. There are tons of settings and features that you can assign. It's just really quick and easy and I love it. This makes me want to customize the camera a lot more because it is so easy to use. I hope you guys found this video informative, and if you enjoyed it, please give it a like and share this video to support me. Do you have any special tips or things that you really like about Lumix cameras that I have not talked about in this video? If you do, drop a comment below and share it with us.